Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to the Everyday Missionary Podcast. My name is Matt Boswell, and today we're going to jump right in, all right? This is not going to be a long podcast because I want it to be a poignant podcast. And for some, you're going to feel like you're getting scolded. My heart is not to scold us, but my heart is to kind of rattle us a little bit and to get us to slow down and think hard and calculate our actions in life. And it all stems from this idea that I believe the only reason Jesus leaves us here to suck oxygen and export carbon dioxide and to have jobs, make money, and do things is so that we can be on brand and on mission. Our mission is the gospel. Our brand is grace. We are here to show Jesus to the world, and anything that gets in the way of that target is a waste of our time. It may, in fact, actually be detrimental to others in our lives more than helpful unless we can really discern and distill down what we're supposed to do. And in the simplest way, kind of the theme for today is that I want us to learn how to debate people less and how to understand them more. And I'm saying that probably in light of what we're going into right now. So the last few nights have been the Democratic National Convention. We're going to have the RNC stuff coming up too. There's all of this politics in the air. And for us as evangelicals, I think it's incumbent on us that we realize that our job is not to be here to defend policies or politics or economies. That is not our job. Our job is not to be here to defend nationalism or a certain patriotism. Our job is to be Jesus. Our job is to live Jesus. Our job is to embody and to export Jesus in all of our contexts. And the only reason we are left on this planet is for that purpose. And if we fail in that purpose and we get caught up in all the other stuff and we put more passion in that, we put more energy in that, if we burn bridges over that, if we end friendships because of that, if we fail to reach lost people because we're so riveted by our political ideology and our sense of morality and our rightness and their wrongness, then you know what? Honestly, one day when we are dead and we look Jesus in the eye, I don't think we're going to have great answers for why we wasted so much time. Yes, there is my early out of the gate scolding right there, right? And so here's what I want to encourage all of us to do. I want to encourage all of us to spend a lot more time understanding others versus debating them. And I want us to spend a lot more time empathizing with our opposites than rigging in our mind how we can either scold, we can undercut, we can undermine, or out-argue our opposites. Because honestly, I think that is a feeble waste of time to try to basically bludgeon another person into the kingdom. And I think it's a complete waste of time to try to argue somebody into loving Jesus. It doesn't work that way. It's never worked that way. I don't know about you, but I have never been argued into any passionate position. I have been wooed. I've been won over. I have been convinced with really thoughtful, insightful ideas. I have been loved into other positions, but I have never been belittled into things. And I know I make this a theme pretty often in the podcast, but we're now going into a time where I think we're going to be tempted. We're going to be incredibly tempted to want to say snarky things, to best the other side, to talk about the other side of our political or economic or social ideas in ways that were, frankly, it's not just us and them, but it's us, the smarter ones, them, the dumber ones, us, the more moral ones, them, the more immoral ones. And frankly, it doesn't even matter if you're on the left or the right, the temptation is the same. It's the exact same, right? Where there is this sense of superiority, which is so contrary to Christ, right? And then they're the inferior ones. And then in that, I'm the moral superior in this, and you're the moral inferior in this. And instead of it being like, hey, I'm just a person that was lost and is found, and I want to reach you because you're lost and he can find you. Like, instead of doing that, we do make it sound like, you know what, there is a better side and a lesser side. And we then defend the better, lesser side, not in the name of Christ or not in the name of the gospel, and certainly not in the spirit of grace, but rather we do it in such a way that it's meant to almost communicate, like, if you're going to be on that side, you're always going to be a lesser person. And until you join my side, I will not see you as a fully rounded, better person. And so this is why I am asking all of us to take our calling and commission more seriously than we take our party affiliation or moral standard, our sense of patriotism or nationalism. Like all those other things are radically secondary in proportion to the gospel and grace and Jesus and worship and honoring what God calls us to do in the Bible, where really he calls us to be kind of above all those things and just remain on mission. Like that's the most important thing that we are to engage in. Get past our petty passions, get past the things that are frankly going to end when this world ends, and get on board with the stuff that will go on beyond that time. And I think this is important because, again, we're going to be just incredibly tempted to not actually do that thing. I'm already hearing it. I'm already seeing it. I'm watching it ramp up as the election's going to ramp up. And, you know, I watch Christian friends online say really derogatory things about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And not just simply policy things, like just name calling, like just outright name calling. Now, I get that most of us as Christians are not going to have a chance to share the gospel with AOC. Like, I get that, right? But I think if you quizzed AOC and said, hey, what do you think evangelicals think of you? It's not going to be flattering. And the fact that she has called herself a woman of faith, I think most people would say, no, she can't be a woman of faith. Why? Because she's a socialist and she's on the left and she's a radical feminist and da-da-da-da-da. And then she's young and then she's dumb and she says stupid stuff. And there's this kind of derogatory tone where I go, you're right. We've made sure she knows there is no room for her at the inn or in the kingdom or with Jesus, right? Because we've let her know we don't like you, right? And see, this is the problem. I just use that as an example because it's kind of low-hanging fruit and easy to do. But it's an example of how we don't mind, for the sake of our politics, to undermine our witness, to undermine our kind of spiritual authority in this world that says this world is not nearly as important to us as Jesus and the world to come. Right? We go, no, right now I got to fight for this world. I got to make the case for this world because this is an existential matter and an existential threat. And if the other side wins, the country as we know it will be gone. I've been hearing that my entire life. If so-and-so wins, the world as you know it will come to a halt. Like God isn't on the throne anymore or something like that. Like it's super strange, right? And so we're willing to sacrifice our allegiance to Christ for our allegiance for party, for policy, for economic strategy, for military might, for whatever it is, you know, international diplomacy or the lack thereof. We will sacrifice witness. And that is a problem. We don't want to sacrifice our witness. And I think the road to that is trying to humanize those on the other side of whatever our politic might be. More than trying to best them, to shame them, to outsmart them, maybe try to understand them, to kind of get inside their sneakers for a little bit and empathize with them. And to realize that those on the other side of a thing, they're not all dumb and we're all smart, but rather they're human and we're human, and they have a narrow view and we have a narrow view, and we all know less than half of everything. And what's more important is we all bear the image of God and we are estranged from God, and I got to figure out a way to build a bridge to understand where they're at. And then from that, I can share with them a message that is more important, actually a message that will bring real eternal change more than, again, us just moving the chairs on a sinking ship known as the Titanic, or as known as the human race, where we're just constantly trying to manage each other's sin with other sins. That's not going to solve anything. But the gospel and grace and Jesus, he eternally solves things. See, I think about this idea of trying to understand people more than just simply out-debate them or outsmart them. I think about this in Acts chapter 17. Paul rolls into Athens, and his first reaction is negative. His first reaction is a visceral kind of, he's repulsed by what he sees on the hillside, all these idols and shrines to all these gods. And his first reaction is, these people are bad, and he thinks that because why? Well, because he's a good Jewish boy converted to Jesus. He's morally the superior, they're morally the inferior, and he's bothered. And that's where most of us would probably just let the story stop. That's right. We're the moral ones, they're the immoral ones, right? On the political spectrum, the people on the left think the right are immoral, and the people on the right think the left are immoral, so they both just think each other's immoral, right? So Paul feels these people are immoral. But then Paul moves from the sense of internal derision to, wait, I need to understand these people. I want to be able to sympathize with them. I want to be able to build bridges to them. I want to be able to connect with them. And so he does a little homework. Well, they hear him then preaching, and they kind of call him to task a little bit. So Paul's speaking in the marketplace. The Epicurean and Stoic philosophers, they hear about this and they go, who is this babbler? Which means they see him as the morally inferior one. So Paul's offended by these morally inferior people, and now the philosophers in Athens, they hear about Paul and they're like, who is this chump? Who is this lowly person? We're the intelligent, highfalutin ones, right? So Paul rolls in, and at that point he could have rolled in and said, can I just straighten this out? You guys are all dirtbags, you're going to hell, right? But he doesn't do that. Instead, he quotes their writers, and he refers to their history, and he does things in such a way that what he shows is, I have gone out of my way to understand you. And not just to understand you, but to appreciate your heritage, to appreciate your thinkers and your process for how you figure out the world. And then from that, he figures a way to use that to then build a bridge to Jesus. And so the very thing that he was bothered by, all these shrines, he taps into one of them. It's this altar to the unknown God, right? And Paul says, now that altar, can I tell you about that unknown God? I know him. And then he uses it as this opportunity to share Jesus. See, I think this is brilliant because, again, he doesn't worry about winning an argument. He worries about winning people. He doesn't worry about pointing out their flaws because, again, if you point out flaws, even if a person acknowledges their flaws, but they don't acknowledge Jesus, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. And so he cares about the real target. And so then he's given this opportunity to do that. And in the end, some people believe, some people disbelieve, and some people go like, we got to think about it more. Like, that's what it is. But what I love about this is that, again, he has self-restraint and says, you know what, if I make like 50 different points against how foolish or immoral or broken or dumb or how risky they are, in the end, it will not solve a single real problem. And so instead, he chooses to love them, to get them, to empathize, sympathize, and from that mobilize their background to his advantage to build a bridge. And in that, he's not trying to manipulate the environment. No, he's really trying to make an investment into the environment. And see, I believe this is the way that we as evangelicals today need to function. And I'll be candid again, I don't think we're doing that very well. I keep believing that the reason the evangelical church in the United States is shrinking is because we are more fixated on our politics and our morality than we are on Jesus and the gospel and grace. We are not on brand. We are off brand. We are closer to Old Testament legalists at times than we are to New Testament conveyors of grace. Because grace is something that should be heard and felt and undeniably noticed and seen in people. And I'm not sold on the fact that most people would characterize evangelical Christianity as a religion of grace. It's just not going to be the thing. It's going to be a religion of rules. It's going to be a religion for the right even, right? Most people outside of evangelicalism think evangelical is just another word for conservative or Republican. And then with that, all the baggage that ensues that says those on the R side, look at those on the D side as being less aware, less intelligent, less ethical, whatever it is. And so instantly it's pitted the better against the worst. But here's what we know as Jesus followers. We're all worst, right? We're all worst. There before the grace of God go I have no merit to bring before Jesus. When I'm dead and I look him in the face, I cannot say, here's the 50 things I did, even in your name, because frankly, I wouldn't do those things if it wasn't for him and me to do those things. He gets the credit. I don't get the credit. So really, it's his grace that I don't get all the blame, as well as the fact that I get none of the credit. It's all his grace, right? It's all his grace. And so this is why, again, we want to be more fixated on our objectives and our goals. And here's the way I want us to look at this. We use the word apologetics as Christians. And if you're not familiar with this, apologetics comes from a Greek word that means to give a defense of the faith. And I think sometimes we think our apologetic job also spreads into ethics and morality and policy and all those kinds of things as well. And so we see our politics as an extension of our apologetic in the world. And so we think our job is then to defend all these things, right? Morality and values and family and marriage, and the list goes on and on and on. So we got to defend all these things. And then we go defense. It means I have a sword and a shield and I need to go to war to defend. And I think we need to see this differently. I think we need to see our apologetics less as being a defense and more as being an excuse to show the world grace. That our apologetics needs to be an excuse to display this is the kind of love we're talking about. This is the kind of mercy that you need to see. This is the kind of going the extra mile and turning the other cheek that Jesus taught us to inhabit and to live out, right? That is why we do apologetics as this canvas that we get to paint on to display all these values that are so otherworldly that our world just doesn't know how to emulate unless, again, Jesus and the Spirit does the work inside the people. In fact, I go to this passage out of 1 Peter chapter 3. He says, "In your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense, an apologetic," it's literally where the word comes from, "to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect." See, here's what I love about this, and I've used this many times, but I love the fact that if we fail to do it with gentleness and respect, we have not done apologetics. So I think sometimes we think apologetics is, here's the truth, and if you choke on it, that's your problem. Here is just the raw facts. If you don't like that, tough on you. It's because you have a hard heart, too bad. That's your problem, not my problem, because I speak in spirit and in truth, right? But if we don't have the Spirit of Christ in that, which is a spirit of gentleness and respect, you've defended nothing. Maybe yourself, maybe your ego, maybe your pride, maybe your politic, maybe your sense of morality in this world, but you have not defended Jesus. Because the defense of Jesus is the display of Jesus, and the display of Jesus is the display of grace, of mercy. See, the very thing that Jesus came to do is to get inside our sandals, right? He comes and he sympathizes with our weaknesses because it says he was tempted in every way as we are, yet without sin. We see that in Hebrews chapter 2, and then we see that's why in Hebrews chapter 4 he shows grace and mercy and understanding when we have weakness. So in the same way that Jesus empathizes with our silly, folly, blind brokenness, we too should do the same with others who don't know him. And we should do the same with those even who claim to know him, right? Like, we should still understand that. If anything, we should be the most gracious people, the ones that understand Jesus the best. And sometimes we sound like the most judgmental, certainly against those who don't agree with us ideologically or politically or morally. We sound superior. We don't sound like servants. And so that is my challenge for all of us today. I know this is a little bit more of kind of a barbed podcast, right? But I just know, I can just feel, I'm already seeing on social media and from different pastors around the country that there's that whisper in their ear that says it's political season and everything's at stake. And if our guy doesn't win, the world is going to fall apart. And then we get baited out of fear or anxiety or whatever to make kind of silly battles where we think our job is sword and shield defense instead of, ooh, this is a time to show joy and hope and peace and a confidence in Christ, and from that a love of enemies so that hopefully enemies will become allies in the common goals of Christ. Because that's the calling of the everyday missionary. That is the calling in our lives. And when we take more ownership of that than we do of our earthly passions and pleasures, the more the Spirit works in us, the more we build bridges to others, and the more we will be everyday missionaries.